Hey Squeeze students, we're on to our second video of the Algebra 2 unit. We're still talking about key features of functions. And in this video, we're going to talk about a really important concept, which is domain and range. And you're going to need a couple graphs for this lesson. There's 4 of them, so make sure you have those cut out ready to go. We don't need them quite yet, but you'll need them for the example. So domain, what is domain? Domain, I'm going to explain it a couple different ways. Domain is your possible x values. Possible x values. Okay, another way to talk about it is your inputs. It's what you are allowed to or what you are putting into a function. And then looking at a graph, your x-axis is this axis, the horizontal axis. So an easier way to think about domain is your left to right. So what's the furthest left your graph goes, and what's the furthest right your graph goes. Range, similar idea. Range, if domain is the possible x values, range is your possible y values. And your y values, if you're talking about a function, are your outputs. And looking at a graph, your y-axis is your vertical axis. So it's your down to up. How far down does your graph go? How far up does your graph go? So let's look at a couple examples. I think that'll really help us a lot here. If we're looking at this first one, our graph is just 4 different points. Okay, they're not connected at all. We're not allowed to connect them. We're just going to look at x values and y values. So I'm going to start by writing down the ordered pairs of each of these points. So our first point is left 1 and up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So -1, 5. I'm going to put these in different colors here. And then our second point is right 2 up 1. So 2, 1. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and down 2. I know some of these are a little bit hard to see, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this. And the last one then would be 7, 1. All right, so the reason why I kept switching colors here is because all of the all of the blue numbers I wrote down were x values. And remember, x values are our domain. So in this case, there's 4 inputs, 4 different x values that were used in the graph. So we're just going to list them. And I always go left to right. So I'm going to start with -1 and 2 and 6 and 7. So that's it. That's our domain. Those are all of the possible x values. Nothing else. There aren't any other points on our graph. And then our y values are all the red ones. So I'm going to, again, go like kind of bottom to up. So -2 is our lowest one. And then I'm going to move up the graph. And we have 1. 1 comes up twice. We don't need to list it twice. We're just going to list it once. And then as we move up the graph, 5 is our highest one up. So I always do domain left to right and range bottom to top. Get in that habit if you can. All right, second example. This time our points are connected. So our domain and range are going to look a little different. We're going to use interval notation, just like we did in the last lesson. Okay, so to do this, I'm going to go to the furthest left our graph goes. And I'm going to go furthest right our graph goes. And we're going to think about it the exact same way that we thought about this situation in our last lesson. So we went to -1, 2, 3, 4, and we had a closed dot. And then we went all the way over to +2, and we also had a closed dot. So when we're talking about domain, we're going to use brackets because we had 2 closed dots. Our leftmost number was -4, and our rightmost number was 2. So hopefully pretty simple. And then we're going to do kind of a similar thing for the range. I'm going to find the lowest number, and we have to look, and these are, again, kind of hard to read, but we're going to call that -1. So the lowest our graph goes is -1. The highest our graph goes is right there at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going from -1 to 5, including both -1 and 5. We don't have any open dots. We don't have any infinities on this one. So everything is regular brackets. Okay. What I have seen some students do is I've seen students make boxes around their graph. So they'll go like here and here and here. And they'll put their whole graph like in a box. It's not my favorite thing ever, but if that works for you, that's totally fine. What they'll do then is they'll say that this is -1 and this is 5. And then this, for this left it goes, is -4 and 2. That gets a little bit confusing for me, but again, if that's a strategy that works for you, go for it. All right, next example. This time we have this squiggly line and we have an open dot. So I'm going to use my same strategy. I'm just going to look at the furthest left our graph goes, which is right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, so -4. And then the furthest right our graph goes is here at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm just going to write that down before I forget. Notice though we have an open dot at -4. So that needs to be a regular parenthesis because it doesn't actually touch -4. It gets close but doesn't touch. And then it goes up to 6. And at 6 we do have a closed dot, so we're going to close it up. Use a bracket on the right side. Okay, range. We have to be a little careful here because our range, the lowest it goes, isn't really at a point. There's no real dot there, but this is our low spot. Okay, this is the lowest our graph goes. So if we look over, I'm going to call that -2. That's as low as we go. Okay, and then our high point is up here at 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and we do touch. Now there's not like a closed dot or an open dot. So anytime you just have a line, as long as it looks like it's touching -2 and it's touching 4, we're going to use these guys. Okay, if you don't see an open dot, you're going to assume that it's closed. So -2 is the lowest. Remember, we always go from the bottom up. And 4 is our biggest. Okay, you would never want to write these backwards. If you have a big number and then a small number in that order, that's bad. Don't do that. Always left to right, down to up. All right, and then last one is our one with some arrows here. So this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, maybe. For domain, we have these arrows. Now, we don't really know what's happening with this function, but since the arrow is pointing like ever so slightly to the left, we're going to assume that this graph never stops going to the left. Okay, it's just going to keep gradually going to the left forever and ever and ever and ever, leading to negative infinity. Same on the right. We're going to assume that it keeps going ever so slightly to the right. That's a really bad infinity sign. Forever. Okay, so it goes left forever, right forever, meaning it's going from negative infinity to infinity. For range, we're doing down to up. Now, I think it's pretty clear that our graph is going down forever. Those arrows on both sides are definitely pointing down. It's not going to stop, so it's going down forever. So that's going to be our left limit here. Okay, now to the right, as we go up, it does not go up forever. It stops. This is the peak. This is the top of our graph. So it ends at a y value of 3. And it touches it, so we're going to use that guy there. All right, I don't have much of a summary for that one. If you have questions, if domain and range is not making sense to you, definitely ask. This is not one that you want to just ignore if you're not good at it, because it will keep coming up. So go ahead, do the practice and the mastery check.